well, how do I access it to get it where I'm not scaring them? You're already scaring them if you're thinking that. It's when do you get in there? I know guys that get in there at 3 a.m. They're sitting in the tree stand, and they don't get daylight till 7, and they're seeing every deer in the woods because they don't want to be associated with all these other deer. And so you go and see these 3 or 4 big cattle trails, and then you see that little bitty trail coming off to the side. That's the trail I'm going to focus on. That doesn't mean that those deer that big buck don't travel that main trail at all. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's just, for the most part, my experience, these deer are finding those little bitty small trails where you say, it looks like a deer came off that bank right there. Not, there's a deer trail. It's, I think there's been a deer come down that bank, and it's been more than once or twice. That's what I'm going to focus on.
So how did you figure that out? And what gave you the confidence to like really start focusing on that?
I have a man that knows a lot about deer hunting that I learned from, and just, I mean, being in the woods my whole entire life and putting in a lot of hours in a tree and just saying, like, I'm sitting on this main trail, but that buck came 60 yards away, and I go over there and just look and say, why did he come here? Why did he do that? And you say, well, that ain't really much of a trail, but you can tell that there's been one there, before. Mm-hmm. That's how I came to. Now, they'll use those main trails early season because they're not worried about putting down a lot of scent because their bats were grouped up. But as the season goes on, they're splitting up. They're like, I don't want to be associated with them anymore because there's a pecking order that's coming, but just spending a lot of hours in the woods, man. Thousands.
So one thing you mentioned earlier, and this is what I want to get back to with the trails, is there some situations when you go hunt trail intersections or just areas where there's like just trails kind of working together? What is that typically around? Like, is it like terrain feature wise, like cut food? Like, what do you mean by like potential trail intersections that would make for like a decent sit in the mountains?
So there's a ton of road beds up here.
Yep.
A ton of road beds. And I like where 2 road beds intersect because they'll cross them, they'll walk up them. I love that. That's one of the main things that I really look for is if I can find 2 road beds intersect, especially for camera purposes. There's no really terrain feature that is going to be around. I mean, it's normally side-heeled, obviously. But to me, it's just these deer like easy, but they don't love easy. And that's something that I had to understand. It's like, how many times have you sat in the woods and like, why did that deer do that? Mm-hmm. Like, why did he come? Man, he seems like you would have thought he would have come down that trail.
Came a steep slope or something.
Yeah, but that deer really actually came from this way every single time. You just not putting 2 and 2 together there. And it's very tough because I try to find where trails intersect, but it's for cameras only. It's not necessarily, unless it's the rut. Now, if it's the rut, I want 8 trails intersected, and I don't care if they are cattle trails. But as far as like when it's not the rut, I don't really care if trails intersect. I'm trying to find where that buck can win those trails. And can I shoot those trails? Most likely, but that's not my focus. Like, it's within seeing distance for me, but I'm like, where's the wind? Where am I going to be upwind to where I can maybe find where that buck wants to come upwind?
One theory that I kind of have about specifically bucks and how they move is that they'll take the path of least resistance that is the safest for them, right? Mm-hmm. So they're not going to, like if they're totally unpressured and they're just acting like deer, like maybe they'll walk that logging road or whatever.
Sure.
If they got pressure though, then that's when they kind of bail off and they start doing weird stuff. Is that kind of like what you're saying with these trails?
Pretty much. Yeah. It's more of I think that a deer, its nose is its greatest thing about it. It's not its eyes, it's not its ears, it's its nose. And that deer will go where its nose tells it to go, and it's, if they can smell that main trail and they know there's no danger, sure. Yeah, they're going to take that path of least resistance to get to where they're trying to go, because they feel that it's safe for them. But big bucks like to cut. If you're seeing a lot of cutting, and I heard this on the podcast, and I kind of agree with it to an extent. Said, how many times have you been sitting in the woods, that big buck's coming, and then all of a sudden, like, why is he not walking right by this? But all of a sudden, he just cuts and just turns and goes up the hill or comes down the hill. Well, it's kind of like whenever you get home. You walk in your house, not every time you go to the refrigerator and grab a beer. Not every time you go to the bathroom, use the bathroom. Not every time you go to your bedroom, kick your boots off. Sometimes you want to go to a recliner. Sometimes you walk outside. So it's kind of like when you're starting to see that cutting from deer doing weird things, maybe you're close to their bed. I don't know how, I don't know, because they feel like they're closer to home. You're at their home. So I try to cut off that cutting. Like try to get, so when I tell you that I go in and focus on food, I want to, yes, I do like try to be mindful of where their bed, where can these deer come from? I don't really care where their bed is, but where can these deer come from? And I want to get in between where they're trying to go to and where they're coming from. Now I want to be able to shoot where they're trying to go to, but I want to get there to minimize that cutting action, and that has helped me probably more than anything, is just trying to cut them off before they cut me off, basically.
One thing that really makes or breaks a lot of hunts, no matter where you're at, but especially I could see it being the case up here, is proper access and how you get into the woods. And I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this because like you don't really know where they're bedding. They're kind of bedding everywhere. Sometimes they're laid up in the sapling thicket or the rhododendron. Sometimes they're laid up and they're watching 300 yards down a wide open hill. How do you account for that? I mean, what do you do to avoid just blowing a bunch of deer out that, you mentioned earlier, you've seen them get up and walk off before. Do you like try to find a low spot and take that up the mountain or wrap around to something side hill, and general thoughts?
So I think that you were focusing on where to access. You need to focus on when to access.
That's a good answer.
It's not where, it's when, because these deer have no rhyme or reason to bed in one spot. They can bed anywhere, but they're all going to bed generally around the same time. So you don't know if he's going to bed on this ridge that you're trying to go to, or if he's bedding where he can see that ridge, or if he's bedding just around the ridge. It's not where, it's when. Now, when you go, that's only really applies to this area in these vast mountains. You go an hour and a half east of here, 2 hours east of here, it's not when, it's where, right? Because it's a little bit more flat land. The deer, you can you need to learn how to navigate because of wind purposes. But here with such a predominant, we don't have a predominant north-south, we have a predominant swirling wind. And I think it's more focusing on like, okay, why is it I'm seeing all of these beds, there's all this sign, but I'm not seeing any deer? Because I honestly think the focus is, well, how do I access it to get it where I'm not scaring them? You're already scaring them if you're thinking that. It's when do you get in there? I know guys that get in there at 3 a.m. They're sitting in the tree stand, and they don't get daylight till 7, and they're seeing every deer in the woods. I know sometimes you can walk in gray light, and you won't jump those deer. It's when are they there? When do they want to be here? I need to be here 2 hours before when they're going to be there. So I think it's just a different perspective. It's just looking at when versus where.
I'm guessing you're a moon guy?
No.
Okay.
No, I've killed more big deer on full moons than I have anything.
Well, okay. Interesting. So how are you determining when they're going to be there?
What time of year is it?
Go on.
So, I mean, if it's the rut, I'm walking in gray light. If it's late season, I'm not hunting in the morning. If it's early season, I'm hunting morning and evening. I'm just getting in there earlier. These deer are so focused on food right now but they say, why don't you hunt the south early in the morning? Why don't people hunt early in the morning, early season? Because those deer are in there at daylight or an hour before daylight, and you're going to scare every deer. Man, if it's a big enough buck, I'll get in there at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't care. If he's big enough and I know he's in there, and if I can get away with the wind, I will. I'll get in there and try it.
Yeah, well, you were telling us earlier before we started recording that this time of year, you'll leave 3 hours before daylight to go to a spot to try to get in there if you think you have a good opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if he's a big enough buck, we'll do anything to try to kill him on a legal standpoint, Like, I mean, if he's big enough and he's there, what wouldn't you do? And I know people that have gotten their stand at midnight, 11 o'clock the night before, because that deer will show up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and he will stay till an hour after daylight, because that's where he bedded. Maybe he was bedding close and he knew, he's like, I can't get in there. And it's what are you willing to do to kill that big deer? Because I promise you, you've said some prayers at night. You've said some prayers in a tree stand. Say, Lord, if you could just give me the strength to just wake up at 2:00 in the morning, I know I can kill this deer because he's in here right at daylight, but I cannot get in here. Yes, you can. I promise you, you can get in there.